So with this new surge I don't know how to speak, and I speak for a living. This new surge of the Delta variant of COVID is really making a lot of people stop and question what the hell's going on with the vaccine. How can we have such a giant surge with a decent chunk of the country is now vaccinated? Well, we're going to dive into that right now, and I'm going to tell you what the deal is with how effective the vaccine is against the Delta variant, and how there's some stuff that's misleading, of course, that's being pumped out there over this. So first, let me show you from Forbes. They say Pfizer shot just 39% effective against Delta infection, but largely prevents severe illness, Israel study suggests. Okay, so now this is new study coming from Israel. Previous studies showed about 64% protection from getting COVID. Now, I got to explain in detail what these different things mean, because a lot of people's initial interpretation of what I'm saying here is different from what it really is. So bear with me as I explain here. But there were previous studies which showed actually no, the vaccines are pretty much just as effective against the Delta variant as it was against the previous variant. So let me give you some more. A full course of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was just 39% effective at preventing infections and 41% effective at preventing symptomatic infections caused by the Delta COVID-19 variant, according to Israel's health ministry. That's down from the early estimates of 64% 2 weeks ago from a different preliminary study. Now, here's probably the more important part. The vaccine still provides very high levels of protection against hospitalization, severe illness, and death. So there's 92% protection against hospitalization and 91% protection against severe illness. We showed this chart on the show the other day. There was a chart that showed hospitalizations, and you saw the unvaccinated, it goes like this, like that right there. And then with the vaccinated, it's just like a ever so slight tick up of vaccinations. So without a doubt, the vaccine is providing protections. However, those new numbers, let me repeat them. I want to be clear every time I talk about this. 39% effective at preventing infections and 41% effective at preventing symptomatic infections. So what does that mean? Here's what it means. This is summing it up in layman's terms. If you're vaccinated and you're exposed to the virus, you may not get any symptoms at all, and you may not even get the virus at all. But it definitely is possible, and it's more likely with the Delta variant versus the previous variant, that if you're exposed to the virus and you're vaccinated, you can still get COVID, and you may even be symptomatic, but the symptoms are not going to be anywhere near as severe as somebody who isn't vaccinated. So what we're seeing is even people who are vaccinated, there are plenty of mild cases of COVID, and there's even like a lot of moderate cases of COVID. So you might have what feels like a bad cold or a weak standard flu. Like you might feel like that. That's happening in much higher numbers. But again, it used to be over 95% effective against severe illness, hospitalization, and death, and some studies had it 98 or 99% effective against severe illness, hospitalization, and death for the various vaccines. But even that number has dropped, but it hasn't dropped enough for concern. So protection against severe illness and hospitalization is 92% and 91% respectively. So it has dropped, but it only dropped, single digits. Before it was like over 95% effective. So again, the big takeaway here is don't freak out. If you're vaccinated and you get it, you'll either not get it and have no symptoms, or you could get it and be asymptomatic, or there is a decent chance you could still get it and have mild symptoms or even some moderate symptoms, but you're overwhelmingly likely, if you're vaccinated, you're overwhelmingly likely to not end up in the hospital and not die, and you have way more protection than somebody who's unvaccinated. So I wanted to do this segment to let you guys know the update on the data, because truth has to come before everything else. And, previously it was the vaccine was more effective against the alpha variant. It was, but the nominal drop in effectiveness is really not enough that should dissuade you from getting the vaccine. Because listen, I've argued this before. Everybody knows my feelings on this, but I really believe that the only numbers that matter are protection against severe illness and hospitalization and death. So if it was 95% or 98% effective now, it has dropped, but it's only dropped to 92 and 91% effective. So it's still a very effective vaccine. And then the final point is, I have to be honest, I was initially skeptical of this idea of a booster shot because it did feel like a pharma grift. And they were pushing it before we had evidence at all that a booster was effective and would be a good idea. So it sort of was, pharma was being greedy and putting the cart before the horse and all the things that pharma usually does. And I'm a huge skeptic of big pharma. And at one point, I was just flat out against the idea of any sort of booster shot. But guess what? Israel decided, not only are we going to do boosters, but we're not even going to count you as vaccinated unless you've had a shot within the past 6 months. And so now a bunch of people have gotten a third shot there. And again, you could look at that and say, hey, that's overkill. Where's the evidence that this is a good idea? So on and so forth. There's going to be more studies that come out on boosters within the next year or so. But guess what? For all the people who had booster shots, only 0.2 of the first 1.1 million recipients that got a third shot were infected with the coronavirus. So in other words, you want to know what really worked to sort of stop COVID in its tracks? Booster shots. So you get a lot of protection, especially from hospitalization, severe illness, and death from getting initially vaccinated. But for the people who had the third shot, so in other words, they had it very recently, it basically stopped COVID in its tracks, and it worked phenomenally well against the Delta virus. So listen, I know this isn't something I wanted to think about, and this isn't something anybody else wanted to think about, but it does appear like the best way to fight against COVID, at least with these variants that we have to this point, is every 6 months or 8 months, you're going to be getting a booster shot. And listen, it's annoying, it's a pain in the ass, but if that's what it takes to basically guarantee you're not going to get really sick from COVID, then sign me up, son. Sign me up. The other thing is, they say that the evidence to this point is whatever the shots are that you got previously, you should get that same shot for a booster. So if you got Moderna, you'll end up getting a Moderna one. If you got Pfizer, you'll end up getting a Pfizer one. If you got Johnson & Johnson, you'll end up getting a Johnson & Johnson one. Now, it's not that it wouldn't work if you mix and match it. It's that the evidence to this point and the studies have been done with people continuing to take the same shot that they took before. So I, for example, I got the Johnson & Johnson. If I end up getting a booster, I should probably get the Johnson & Johnson one. And also, the vaccines do have little differences. So the mRNA vaccine, that's the Pfizer and the Moderna. The Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca are not mRNA vaccines. They're the old technology for vaccines, and they found a way to take an adenovirus and make it mimic COVID, and then your body gets the immunity that way. So I would have to get a Johnson & Johnson one, because at least the studies to this point show that's the way to go. Now again, this preliminary, and this is from Johnson & Johnson, so take it with a grain of salt, because that's the company that stands to benefit here, but they said there was a 9 times uptick in anti-COVID antibodies when you had a booster shot of the Johnson & Johnson and you previously had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So we'll see, but that's why there's a surge. It is primarily a pandemic of the unvaccinated right now. And so people who are sort of fallen behind and not keeping up and never got vaccinated, they're the ones who are really feeling the brunt of this. But it is also true that there has been a slight downtick in how effective the vaccines are, but don't let that dissuade you from getting it, because again, the more you get, the more protection you have. And that's, as of this point, that's an ironclad scientific fact.